Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Critical Issues Forum Teachers Online Workshop. So today's lecture is going to be this workshop's final lecture, and Mr. Jean duPreez's second lecture. So today's lecture title is Nuclear Risk Reduction versus Potential Use of Nuclear Weapons. What are the odds? So since I have already introduced Mr. duPreez for his first lecture, so let me omit that part, and why don't we just jump into the lecture. So Jean, are you ready?
Yes, I am.
Okay, great. So I'm going to give you the microphone to you. So thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I am very pleased to be back in this Critical Issues Forum, and I'm also pleased to offer you the last lecture of the series. And I have slightly changed the topic, and the title is a double title: Nuclear Risk Reduction with Potential Use of Nuclear Weapons. Why should you be worried about the bomb? And what can you do about it? I have quite a number of slides, and I do not intend to go through everything in detail. I hope that the slides will also help you in your classes as a resource and discussion material. I will cover some material that has already been covered during the Critical Issues Forum this year. The purpose of that is to refresh your memory and also to serve as a resource for students. I will look at not only the design of nuclear weapons, the types of nuclear weapons, which countries have them. We will discuss the effect of nuclear weapon use. We will consider what can go wrong. We will look at different nuclear postures by states that have nuclear weapons and consider some potential flashpoints. I will conclude with some myths, facts and myths about nuclear weapons, and then leave you with a few suggested class assignments. As you can tell from these pictures, this is how the world first became known to nuclear weapons. The famous scripture from the Bhagavad Gita that I have become war, the killer of the world, recalled by Dr. Robert Oppenheimer at the time, makes you think about the destructive power of the weapons of those days, which of course is nothing compared to what we have today. This is the view from Earth as was seen from Apollo 10 in May 1969. 26,000 nautical miles on its way to the moon. It's a beautiful picture. This is where we live. However, this is what it could look like after the last scale nuclear holocaust. We often hear about nuclear winter. The whole area in black will be covered in a permanent nuclear winter. I find this very apt. Arundhati Roy is an Indian novelist and a political activist who said the nuclear bomb is the most anti-democratic, anti-human, outright evil thing that man has ever made. This world of ours is 4,600 million years old, and it could end in an afternoon. So imagine the picture that I just showed you, the view from the moon to Earth a day after. There is a famous doomsday clock that has been invented by a group of scientists as a way originally to determine how close we are to doomsday, doomsday being the destruction of the earth. This started in February 1947, and every year these scientists adjust the clock. And interesting, in February 2002, just prior to the US invasion of Iraq and the start of the Iraq war that continues even today, the setting of that clock was 7 minutes to midnight. So even with all of that fear that existed, the setting of the clock was the same as it was after the end of the Second World War. Last year, or this year however, the clock was moved 2 minutes to midnight as a result of the looming threats of nuclear war and climate change. I dare not say more about what climate change means to us today. Of course, at the beginning of this year, there were lots of concern about the threat of North Korea's nuclear program and possible retaliation by the United States. This threat and the rhetoric between the United States and Russia and other countries have, however, increased in the past year. And one can only but wonder where the clock will move to in January next year. A collage of pictures showing the destructive power of nuclear weapons, the different kinds of nuclear weapons, just to give you one flash of how evil these weapons are. They are unique. They are considered a weapon of mass destruction together with chemical and biological weapons. However, they are the only weapon of true mass destruction. A single nuclear weapon has more destructive powers than all weapons used in all wars through human history. This map shows the number of nuclear weapons, close to 15,000 in the arsenals of 9 countries. You can clearly see that the countries with the largest arsenals are the United States and Russia, and that combined, all the other countries have fewer than 1,000 nuclear warheads. Approximately 9,600 of these warheads are in active military service, meaning that they are deployed. Many of them are on what we call head trigger alert and could be launched on minutes' notice. We will talk about that in this course of this lecture. This is a chart showing why countries acquired weapons. Very briefly, of course, the United States was at war during the Second World War. There was fear that Nazi Germany could conceivably build a weapon. The end of the war with Japan offered nuclear weapons a potential use, but it was also to deter the Soviet Union, who at that point started invading the Manchurian Islands of Japan. Of course, the Soviet Union, Russia acquired weapons to deter the US. France and the UK acquired weapons to remain great power status after the end of the Second World War, where, of course, they were very much reduced to smaller powers. China, over time, to deter both the Soviet Union and the US, today I would say also to show its great power status. Israel, out of fear of its neighbors, India, domestic pride, prestige, and to rival China. Pakistan to rival China, but to have the Muslim bomb. North Korea to deter the United States. Iraq wanted to acquire a nuclear weapons program to deter Iran after the Iraq-Iran war, but also to prove that it is the most powerful nation in the Arab part of the world. And there are a variety of present and former suspects, including my own country, South Africa, that acquired nuclear weapons to deter neighbors or the United States for prestige or as bargaining chips. For all the other countries of the world, nuclear weapons have shown no utility. They were not worth the cost, and they could change with the security perceptions. South Africa, for instance, when South Africa became more democratic, when countries to the north of it became independent and also democratic, the reason to acquire and to hold on to nuclear weapons disappeared. You need facilities to enrich uranium or produce plutonium to build a bomb. Very briefly, this chart shows the nuclear production facilities, both the nuclear fuel cycle, from where uranium is mined to where it is produced into highly enriched uranium and with plutonium developed into the nuclear weapons. So the key ingredient to the manufacture of nuclear weapons is fissile material. And that's material whose nuclei can break out or fission when bombarded with neutrons. This would emit more neutrons than they can absorb and create the chain reaction. The most important fissile isotopes are plutonium-239 and uranium-235. Some weapons are made from both these isotopes. Simpler weapons rely more on uranium-235 or highly enriched uranium. Here is a chart of a picture of different kind of nuclear weapons that are there, from the most simple to the most sophisticated. Gun type, implosion type, boosted weapons to thermonuclear. So you'll see in the pictures on the top left, the original Trinity device that was the first device tested by the United States that became the weapons that were used in Japan, Little Boy and Fat Man. Those were, Little Boy was a gun type device that propelled a highly enriched uranium bullet, if you may, into a highly enriched uranium target, which set off the nuclear detonation. Fat Man was a plutonium or implosion type device and imploded plutonium as a result of shaped explosives around its core. On the right, you'll see a boosted fusion weapon and what is today commonly in the arsenals of most nuclear weapon states, thermonuclear weapons. Nuclear weapons need delivery systems, and these systems are unlike the planes used to drop the two original weapons in Japan, are mainly strategic weapons. Submarines launch ballistic missiles and intercontinental ballistic missiles, as well as tactical weapons. These are weapons that can be launched from airplanes. They can be launched even from a little bazooka, as you can see in the picture with the red projectile on it. That was called the little fella. It's no longer in use, but it was a weapon deployed by the United States for possible battlefield use. Large planes, the B-52, the B-2, and their equivalents in Russia and France and other nuclear weapon states are designed to carry these tactical weapons far into the territory of adversaries, as well as cruise missiles. Cruise missiles are very modern missiles that can fly very low above the Earth and it's very difficult to detect. Also important is mobile launchers. Mobile launchers used also by Russia and China. These can be moved and are very difficult to detect. The same with nuclear attack submarines, of course, are highly secretive, operate deep underwater. And these are in a number of countries, in particular France and the UK, as well as the United States, one of the primary launch platforms for their nuclear weapons. The explosive yields of nuclear weapons have developed immensely since they were first designed and used. Just to give you an indication, a typical conventional military bomb is the 1,000 pounds of TNT explosive equivalent. The Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombs were 13 to 20,000 tons of TNT equivalent. The typical nuclear weapon in the US arsenal today range from between 100 to 300 kilotons or 100 to 300,000 tons equivalent in TNT. But you also find low-yield nuclear weapons, far more modern weapons, that can be dialed down to even 5 kilotons or 5,000 tons of TNT. Now we're getting into a field where nuclear weapons can be used as an alternative to some of the large conventional military bombs that but weigh far less. 1,000 pounds of TNT would require a B-52 to carry. A 5 kiloton nuclear weapon can be carried by a much, much smaller delivery system, including small missiles and small planes. Nuclear weapon effects. You have all seen the horrific pictures that keep reminding us of the terrible effect of the use of nuclear weapons in Japan. While these pictures are horrific, it's important, it will be important also for you to draw attention of your students to the effect. Right in the core, from the blast zone, 86% of all people were killed. As you move outside the blast zone, those numbers drop, but then you get into the radiation zone. And as you get further out, you get into the burn zone. And then the further you go, you also need to think about the overpressure. Once a nuclear weapon detonates, the first thing that happens is, of course, the fireball, the explosion that you see. And that is what kills the majority of people and obliterates structures in the core. The overpressure, the pressure created by the explosion, however, destroys everything. This is a heat wave, if you wish, that spreads from the center all the way out to where it starts dissipating. The Hiroshima bomb went as far as about 1.6 kilometers or a mile away, where it was still capable of destroying brick homes. The pictures in the bottom shows more or less the equivalent of overpressure that came as a result of the Hiroshima bomb on a house that was purposely built in the Nevada desert as a way to test what such a size nuclear bomb would do. The picture speaks for itself. This is a simulation, and it's a nice way of your students to play around with these simulations. So the various simulation tools are found on Google. You can pick your own city, you can pick the kind of nuclear weapons, and see what the different impact of a use of a nuclear weapon would be on a particular city. This happens to be Washington, D.C., and the focus of the main target of this particular weapon, which was a 300 kiloton thermonuclear weapon, was the Pentagon. And as you can see, a mile around the Pentagon, everything is obliterated in the fireball. 2 miles out, now you're getting into very close to where the mall is, where the White House is. This severe blast and tremendous heat. 3.5 miles out, now you're already outside the Washington, D.C. area. A massive firestorm engulfs the area within 20 minutes. So from Almagoro to madness. Almagoro is, of course, the desert in New Mexico where the first device called Trinity was tested in July of 1945 as a result of the Manhattan Project. Interesting, in July 24, 1945, after the test, President Truman met with Stalin at Potsdam as part of the efforts to close the Second World War, and informed him that the US now had a new weapon of unusual destructive force. Apparently, Stalin very quickly consulted with these advisors and told them that they need to get the equivalent of Dr. Oppenheimer, who was the chief scientist for the US program, to get the Russian scientists to increase efforts to ensure a Russian bomb. Of course, we know the use of the 2 nuclear weapons in Japan, but it's also important to notice that the Soviet Union detonated its first test or weapon, a very similar weapon that was used in Japan not long after. The UK and France also tested their weapons a few years later. And the first thermonuclear weapon that is more or less the same design as today, but much, much larger, 10.4 megatons. That means 10 million tons of TNT was tested in the South Pacific. This was 770 times more powerful than Hiroshima. The Soviet Union detonated its largest weapon. You may not know what size is this. You may ask your students to take a guess. This is the weapon that you see on the far right-hand corner. It was 52 megatons. The Cold War then suddenly became very hot. As you can see in the left corner of the cartoon, Secretary Khrushchev and President Kennedy are arm wrestling while sitting on 2 nuclear missiles. This shows what brought the world almost to a nuclear war. Cuban Missile Crisis of October 1962, where Cuba received missiles from the Soviet Union, resulted in the United States blocking Cuba, but also setting off a motion that could have resulted if calculations were made wrongly, if perceptions were different in a nuclear exchange between the two then superpowers. The statement by Secretary of Defense McNamara, "I don't know quite what kind of world we live in after we've struck Cuba," and that of Secretary of State Dean Rusk, that I think we'll be facing a situation that could well lead to general war, were real. These are not taken from some fictional novel. And President Kennedy and Defense Secretary McNamara and Secretary of State Dean Rusk were among the leaders of those times that brought back the world from nuclear war. Soon after that, McNamara wrote to Kennedy and sent a memo about that, in his estimation, that 15 to 20 countries could be nuclear armed by 1975 if nothing is done. You see copies of the memo there, and it lists the number of countries. Interesting enough, some countries that actually acquired nuclear weapons were not even on that list. That memo resulted in a number of things. It resulted in, for instance, the partial tech ban treaty, but eventually also the nuclear nonproliferation treaty that is designed to prevent the spread of nuclear weapons. Very interesting and very significant is that while China and India and developing countries were considered at the time incapable, given the low level of industrial development at that time, of acquiring nuclear weapons, China's test in 1964 and India's test in 1974 caught the US and other weapon states by surprise and debunked the perception that nuclear weapons technology can be controlled. During the height of the Cold War, the nuclear threat was at its madness. MAD, in terms of nuclear terms, stands for mutually assured destruction. This is a posture adopted by, in particular, the United States and the Soviet Union, and continued by Russia, that with enough nuclear weapons in your arsenal, you present such a threat to your opponent that even thinking about using a nuclear weapon against you will result in a complete destruction of the other country. And therefore, the thinking at the time was nuclear weapons will actually not be used. It was designed to deter a first strike. And as Thomas Schelling, who was a Nobel laureate, observed, deterrence rests on the threat of pain and extinction, not just on the threat of military defeat. So MAD was not only designed to defeat military targets, but to defeat nations. It was considered that nuclear deterrence would obviously be much cheaper and credible than conventional forces. To have large quantities of nuclear weapons in your arsenal targeted at your opponent, as opposed to having forces on the ground that could actually number hundreds of thousands with the equipment, was considered to be a cheaper way. I'll make a comment about that later to debunk that myth. However, the arms race led to huge stockpiles in excess of deterrence need, and leading to more tension, which we saw during the Cuban crisis. Thomas Schell also observed that given the destructive power of nuclear weapons, we hold this entire terrestrial creation hostage to nuclear destruction, threaten to hold it back into the inanimate darkness from which we came. Very powerful words. World War III has so far been avoided through diplomacy, not nuclear weapons, and a good measure of luck. The United States National Resource Defense Council initiated a study in 1962, partly as a result of the fear that came from the Cuban Missile Crisis. And again, McNamara wrote to Kennedy and asserted that a capability for assured destruction could, with a high degree of confidence, ensure that we could deter under all foreseeable conditions a calculated, deliberate nuclear attack upon the United States. What amounts and kinds of destruction we could be able to deliver in order to provide this assurance cannot be answered precisely, he said, but it seems reasonable to assume that the destruction of 25% of his population, which at that time was 55 million people, and more than 2/3 of industrial capacity would mean the destruction of the Soviet Union as a national society. These are terrible words. This is not aimed at the Soviet Union's military might. This is aimed at the Soviet Union's national society. The chart was part of the memo, and it shows in more detail how they calculate the kill rate of nuclear weapons. On this slide, which is really significant, you'll see two charts. On the top chart, the NRDC evaluated the consequences of the use of two small parts of the US nuclear arsenal against Russian cities. US intercontinental ballistic missiles are spread out in silo fields. And these are in a variety of areas in the United States. If the study was based on the use of one silo field with single warhead Minuteman III ICBMs, bear in mind that Minuteman IIIs can also be loaded with multiple warheads, and one fully laden Trident nuclear submarine with W88 warheads on them. So the blast model shows that by choosing the explosions to detonate above the ground, it's called ground burst rather than air burst that could kill even more people. The casualties would be about 60 million people. It's important to recognize that each of these missile silos or missile fields carry about 150 silos, so assuming 150 warheads. By 1963, at the Malmstrom Air Force Base alone, there were 200 deployed. Each of those warheads had the destructive power of 100 Hiroshima-sized bombs. In 2001, the NRDC updated its study and showed that one United States nuclear submarines loaded with 192 Minuteman IIIs. So this is one submarine that have 192 nuclear warheads on board, could kill 50 million Russians. So this means that if Kennedy's memo was considered to be the number of warheads necessary to destroy national society of Russia, then 200 warheads would be sufficient, not the numbers that we even have today. So the question then is, why is there such little support for much deeper reductions? I'm now going to move more into a few historical facts. These are not meant to scare people. These are facts of accidents that happened. And just to show how close we got to, in fact, not the use of nuclear weapons in a military context, but as a result of an accident. In the 50s, there were several incidents. There was, for instance, a flock of Canadian geese that activated the US distant early warning system as a Soviet bomber attack. A US bomber accidentally released an atomic bomb over the town of Mars Bluff in South Carolina, taking out a girl's playhouse and destroying her family's home. Even worse, a thermonuclear bomb was dropped offshore Georgia in 1968, and the pilot was instructed, as after it crashed into a fighter jet, to jettison the bomb. It was never found. A number of other natural occurrences triggered the ballistic missile early warning system, and indicating to NORAD that the Soviet Union has initiated attack. One of my favorites is a malfunctioning chip in a mini computer caused a similar situation when hundreds of B-52 bombers were prepared for takeoff with weapons on board. Several submarines have sunk over the years with nuclear weapons on board. In 2007, a B-52 bomber mistakenly armed with 6 advanced nuclear cruise missiles flew halfway across the United States. The then chairman of the House Armed Services Committee, Congressman Shelton, referred to the incident as deeply disturbing. But I think the words of Congressman Markey was even more pertinent when he observed that we have been assured for decades that what just happened was impossible. And these things are still possible. Recently, some of the missileers in the US intercontinental ballistic missile silos were found to be not just well enough trained, but did not pay enough attention to their duty. Some of them were using drugs, and with the effect that you don't know what would happen if something goes wrong. So, nuclear deterrence overkill is the madness. Is designed to deter. But the point is, how many weapons are really necessary? Deterrence theory is designed to deter other states from attacking with their nuclear weapons through the promise of retaliation and possibly mutually assured destruction. In the post-war Cold War alliance system, deterrence has changed also to the extended deterrence, meaning that the US military forces would also be deployed, and by that I mean also nuclear weapons, to deter attack on US allies, Europe and in the Asia-Pacific region. What it means, though, is that it brings nuclear weapons closer to Russia. And this obviously creates a higher threat perception. And so the challenge here is, and the threat here is that, of course, these policies are not the sole propriety of the US or Russia. They are also now being duplicated by countries, for instance, in Southeast Asia. India, for instance, has a triad of its own, meaning that it has different ways of deploying nuclear weapons, and as a deterrence, and Pakistan is responding. North Korea, importantly, has also learned the lesson. The lesson is that nuclear weapons provide deterrence from attack. Consider, if you consider the history, the US invaded Iraq and killed, and Saddam Hussein was killed. Muammar Gaddafi was also killed. So what is the message? Without nuclear weapons, you are vulnerable. Nuclear weapons provide deterrence. This is a very dangerous message. But as long as the US, Russia, France, the United Kingdom, and China and others rely on nuclear weapons as a deterrence, they send a message to other countries with nuclear weapons that they too can use nuclear weapons. to protect themselves. This is one of my favorite charts. It shows that the number of nuclear weapons in the arsenals of today and the yield, the combined yield of these weapons. There's a lot of detail in the chart, and you can use this as a discussion point for your students. Each of the little dots on the chart represent a nuclear warhead. It also shows that in the strategic weapons of the US and Russia, that 3,500 of those remain on high alert. And the large amount of weapons that remain in the arsenal of US and Russia. The area in yellow represents the number of detonations of all the explosive power during the Second World War. All the explosives, every bullet, every bomb, and including the nuclear weapons used. So those small little dots next to World War II represent all those powers. So that is a good way of comparing it to combined power today. Nuclear command and control is very important. This is a way for the nuclear states to determine when a nuclear weapon will be launched. While many thousands of weapons have been dismantled since the peak of the Cold War, about 3,500 of these remain on electrical alert, meaning that they can be released on very, very short notice. Now, the US missiles that are on this top alert status will launch on receiving 3 computer-delivered messages. And the launch crews will send these launch messages on receipt of a single computer-delivered command and to launch the missiles. And this is done after receiving the launch codes from the capital, the famous nuclear football that is always shown when the president travel is used to send these codes. But the question is, are there adequate command and control systems in countries such as Pakistan? Then another interesting and very fearful historical fact is that the Soviet Union were working on a doomsday device. Now, this is a theoretical ability to design a weapon that would be so large that it could destroy the world, but would go off automatically without human intervention with a so-called dead hand trigger, which means that the moment it observed incoming missiles from the United States, it would automatically launch through predetermined clearance from the General Staff of the Armed Forces. As teachers, you may have seen the famous Stanley Kubrick movie, Dr. Strangelove, but you may ask yourself, well, this is fact or fiction. In Dr. Strangelove, the world ends with a doomsday device. But nuclear threat is not fiction. The following is really happening. January of '95, Norwegian and American scientists launched a sounding rocket from an island off the coast of Norway to study the aurora borealis of the Norwegian coast. These scientists notified 30 countries, including Russia, about this launch. After reaching an altitude of about 1,400 kilometers. The rocket was detected by Russia. Radar operators interpreted to be a US submarine launched Trident missile. Now, if you remember, in the late 80s, the radar operators did not notice a teenager who flew in with a small plane and landed on Red Square. So naturally, the radar operators were very focused and did not want to be blamed for another incident like that. And for that reason, triggered the alert. President Yeltsin was awakened and immediately notified that the nuclear briefcase is ready. In Russia, it's called the Cheget, to authorize the use of nuclear weapons. The Russian launch doctrine allowed President Yeltsin 10 minutes from the time of detection to decide on what course of action to take. Now, it's not clear from history whether President Yeltsin came close to authorize an attack, but he and Russian observers using the Cheget must have seen that a full-scale nuclear attack by the US was not underway, and that it would not make much sense for a single rocket to be sent to the territory of the Soviet Union. And in fact, they also observed that the rocket was moving away from Russian airspace. The rocket fell back to Earth as planned 24 minutes after its launch. A Russian general observed a fateful accident could plunge the world into the chaos of a thermonuclear catastrophe, contrary to political leaders' wishes. So this was a scientific exercise. Had President Yeltsin and his advisors taken a slightly different decision, we may not be talking to each other today. So now consider this. This is the actual depiction of the actual timelines that it would take from detection to launch. So let's take the same scenario that really happened. The launch occurred at time 0. At 1 minute, it was detected. At 4 minutes, the Russians started to decide what to do. At 10 minutes, the Russian president orders the ballistic missile to be fired. And this is where friction starts for purposes of this discussion. At 12 minutes, the launch codes were issued to the commanders. At 15 minutes, the ICBMs were launched. At 16 minutes, the US satellites observed the launch of the ICBMs. At 19 minutes, NORAD gives the initial estimates of the attack. At 24 minutes, the US early warning systems pick up the incoming ICBMs. At 30 minutes, the US President received final recommendation from the military and from the Secretary of Defense. At 36 minutes, the US President orders the ballistic missiles to be launched. At 38 minutes, the instructions are transmitted to the ICBMs and to nuclear submarines. And at 41 minutes, the missiles are fired. At 43 minutes, the first Russian warhead destroys Washington, D.C. Okay, let's think about nuclear weapons thinking today. Cold War is over, but the madness continues. You have hawks and doves. And amongst the hawks, you continue to have nuclear planners, politicians, and military leaders that believe that thousands of warheads are needed to target possible hostile countries and to keep other conflicts in check. They believe that US nuclear supremacy can survive a first strike and that eroded Russian arsenals would allow the US supremacy to survive. China was always considered too small China has become a real threat to military threat to the US today. And despite domestic and global nuclear taboos, the question that one has to ask yourself is, numbers are not really relevant since one is enough. On the Dove side, the question is, what is the purpose of nuclear weapons amongst partners? What is the role of deterrence amongst other regional states? What is the role of nuclear weapons in regional, ethnic, and regional and religious conflicts? And how can you deter terrorists who use of nuclear weapons? I'm not going to go through much detail on the nuclear security and nuclear postures, but it's important for you and students to understand that each of the countries with nuclear weapons have specific nuclear policies. The United States, the president every 10 years or so issues a nuclear posture review. The latest nuclear posture review of the United States is quite worrisome, since it's moving the United States weapons, the weapons policy away to a more confrontational one, and where it would seek to increase reliance on nuclear weapons and plans to develop new weapons. And this obviously triggers other states, particularly Russia, to adopt similar policies. Also, the US posture impacts on how Russia is viewed and how Russia reacts. So according to the posture, Russian strategy and doctrines emphasize the potential coercive and military uses of nuclear weapons. But it mistakenly assessed that the threat of nuclear escalation or actual first use of nuclear weapons would serve to de-escalate a conflict on terms favorable to Russia. There are several indicators that this is not correct. France, interesting, is reducing its weapons to 300 warheads. It's still far too many. If you think about the kill ratio, it's still enough to, at least in the 1962 study of the NRDC, to destroy Russia. But President Sarkozy has come forward with a more transparent policy, but emphasized that the president must be able to count on nuclear weapons at all times. The United Kingdom has actually reduced its weapons. The United Kingdom only relies on submarines as platforms, but it is also obviously closely cooperating with the United States. China is upgrading its weapons program, and China has for years held a policy not to use nuclear weapons first, not to use nuclear weapons against a non-nuclear weapon country or in nuclear weapon-free zones. However, there are indicators that the no first use policy of China might be changing. Pakistan and India both continue to expand their nuclear arsenals, and their nuclear policies and postures are closely resembling that of other states. Also significant is the decoupling of Indian nuclear strategy between China and Pakistan. Originally aimed at Pakistan, it also puts India now on par with China. So while a more aggressive posture vis-a-vis China would allow India to develop more weapons, it offers it also a first strike against Pakistan. Israel has for decades neither confirmed or denied that it possessed nuclear weapons. Most recently, or in the last number of years, President Netanyahu has introduced the phrase, "We won't be the first to introduce nuclear weapons into the Middle East." The problem is, if you have nuclear weapons, how do you define introduce? Because then they have technically already been introduced. This, of course, sends signals to other countries in that region Finally, North Korea has made significant advantages over the past 2 decades, including testing nuclear weapons. And it is not clear how many they have, but it is clear that they are developing the capability to deliver them. We can very much ask ourselves, are we going back in time? My previous talk mentioned a number of treaties, most notably the Moscow Treaty and the New START Treaty, that had specific numbers built into them to reduce the numbers. These numbers would bring the nuclear arsenals of both Russia and the US down to in the 2000 range. However, those numbers have still not been reached. What is even more troublesome is that in February last year, President Trump criticized Russia for cheating on the New START, and therefore is also not, the United States up until now has not been willing to engage Russia in negotiations on how to take the New START treaty to its next level. But you can ask yourself, even if these treaties are fully implemented, are these numbers low enough? Further troublesome is that President Trump announced just in October of this year the intent to withdraw from the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty, which bans the placement of intermediate nuclear missiles in Europe. President Putin just yesterday announced that we are witnessing a breakup of the arms control system and the rising threat of a nuclear war, which, as he said, could lead to the destruction of civilization as a whole and maybe even of planet. This is President Putin speaking. Quickly highlight a couple of flashpoints. These are my estimation of flashpoints. Might be interesting to have your students consider flashpoints. India, Pakistan, and China. I think one of the highest flashpoints. They're all expanding nuclear arsenals. A test of nuclear weapons amongst the new tests could easily trigger more tests, and who knows where that. Pakistan's conventional asymmetric threat, meaning the rogue elements in Pakistan that could use terrorist acts against India, could escalate India to build up an arms race with China, and who knows, rogue elements in Pakistan could result in a nuclear launch. North Korea, US, Japan, South Korea. The escalation of rhetoric between US and North Korea could lead to further test and the expansion of North Korea's capability. Miscalculations in Pyongyang and Washington could lead us back to the brink of nuclear war, as we saw during the Cuban Missile Crisis, much bigger. What would the Japanese reaction be if North Korea continues to build out its nuclear capabilities? Will the extended deterrence of the US with Japan and South Korea hold, or will these two countries move away and decide to protect themselves, including perhaps with nuclear weapons? And a wild card. There are discussions between North and South Korea about between steps to normalize relations between them. Now, the wild card is, and this is a very far-fetched idea, but what would happen if reunification of the two Koreas could happen before denuclearization? Would the nuclear weapons remain? What about the US and China? There's a current standoff over the South China Sea. What is the role of nuclear weapons in protecting major international shipping lanes and strategic waters should China expand its interest here? China is already expanding its blue water fleet that have nuclear capabilities. What is the threat perception by US allies in the region about China's expansion and therefore relying on US protection? Again, is sending large fleets with airplanes are sufficient as a deterrent. What would Russia's role be in this scenario? The fourth flashpoint, of course, the Middle East, Israel, Iran, and Saudi Arabia. The unraveling of the joint action plan to slow down Iran's or prevent Iran from developing a military capacity provides a pretext for Saudi force aspiration. So it almost provides an excuse for Saudi Arabia to increase its own aspirations. This will also increase Israeli threat perception and could lead to more aggressive Israeli postures. In my view, however, the odds of use of nuclear weapons in the Middle East are very low. Israel, during the Yom Kippur War, apparently operationalized some of its nuclear weapons. But even that was considered to be the so-called Samson option, case of the complete destruction of Israel. The deterrence role of nuclear weapons in the Middle East makes absolutely no sense. And finally, US-Russia. This is not new, this is ongoing, but unfortunately the Cold War style rhetoric is escalated to a point that we have seen in the height of the Cold War. Arms control is falling apart, there is no trust. Russia aspires to retain its or regain its former great power status. The US leadership deficit is leaving Europe vulnerable. Therefore, Europe is looking at its own way of protecting nuclear weapons, protecting itself with nuclear weapons, and any redeployment of short intermediate missiles will be extremely dangerous. The abrogation of the possible walk away by the United States of the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty could potentially leave open that door. I want to conclude with a number of nuclear weapon facts and myths. The first fact is nuclear weapons threaten civilization and diminish security everywhere. Nuclear weapons are the worst instruments of terror. 15,000 nuclear weapons exist in the world, representing 1,000 times the firepower of World War II. 9 countries are known to possess these weapons. More than 95% of all these weapons are in US and Russian arsenals. Of those, 3,500 are on head trigger alert, ready to be launched in less than 10 minutes. The yield of most US weapons is between 100 to 300 kilotons, 10 to 30 times more destructive than Little Boy that was dropped in Hiroshima. 15 to 24 kilograms of HEU is needed for a nuclear weapon. There are 2 million kilograms in global stockpiles today. It takes as little as 3 to 5 kilograms of plutonium to create a nuclear weapon. Some 500,000 kilograms exist in stockpiles today. Nuclear weapons are a unique equalizer between superpowers and a terrorist group. A terrorist group may not have much nuclear weapons, but if it has one small device, it has an equalizer with a country with hundreds, if not thousands of weapons. And then the NPT, the Nuclear Nonproliferation Treaty, requires nuclear weapons states to engage in good faith negotiations for nuclear disarmament. Here are some myths. Nuclear weapons were needed to defeat Japan in World War II. They were not. General Eisenhower's statement is quite clear. Nuclear weapons prevented a war between the US and the Soviet Union. They did not. Many proxy wars were fought between the two countries, in Asia and Africa and Latin America. So this was another myth. Nuclear threats have diminished since the end of the Cold War. Definitely not. Nuclear terrorism, the threat of nuclear terrorism have arisen US policies to make nuclear weapons smaller and more usable are of concern. The accidental use of nuclear weapons are still high on the threat list. And the spread of nuclear weapons to other states that may perceive them to be an equalizer. During the Cold War, we did not have North Korea to have nuclear weapons. We did not have Iran aspiring perhaps to have nuclear weapons. The US needs nuclear weapons for its national security. This is a myth. Nuclear weapons are the only weapons that could destroy the United States. Their existence and proliferation threaten US security. Nuclear weapons make a country safer. Not true. Many ways for deterrence to fail, including misunderstandings, faulty communications, irrational leaders, miscalculations, and accidents. No leader would be crazy enough to actually use nuclear weapons. One must consider that nuclear acquisition and potential use are rational acts. These are not acts by madmen. They are rational acts that are carefully calculated. US leaders have used nuclear weapons in war. The threat of nuclear attack by India and Pakistan are clear examples of nuclear brinkmanship that could turn into nuclear war. And a nuclear war between those two countries could have an impact on the rest of the world. Nuclear weapons are a cost-effective method of national defense. Not true. The cost of developing the US nuclear program over time exceeds $7.5 trillion. With another 1.2 to $1.5 trillion have been set aside for upgrading the US program over the next 30 years. Imagine what you can do with that kind of money in other parts of the world. Nuclear weapons are well protected, and there's a little chance that terrorists could get their hands on one. Concerns remain over Russia's ability to protect its nuclear forces. Huge amounts of fissile material are in storage, and a coup in Pakistan could lead to the use of or diversion of nuclear weapons to terrorists. Nuclear weapon states are abiding by the nuclear disarmament obligations. Not true. Nuclear weapon states fail to meet their Article 6 obligations. And there's no support for the nuclear weapons amongst the nuclear weapon states for the nuclear ban treaty negotiated last year. Also, the United States and other nuclear weapon states, including China, refuses to ratify the CTBT to ban nuclear testing. The United States have withdrawn from the anti-ballistic missile treaty and may soon do so also from the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty. And final myth, terrorists do not have a territory to retaliate against. More and more statements are coming out of the Trump administration that nuclear weapons serve a purpose to deter terrorists, or nuclear weapons even have a purpose to deter cyber terrorism. Who are you targeting? Who are you going to aim your nuclear weapons at? So that brings me to the final part, where I would like to offer 5 class assignments. These class assignments are aimed to make your students think, to facilitate class discussion, to make them reflect, and at the end, for them to be inspired to take action in a way that we can see the next generation of leaders coming forward to rid the world of nuclear weapons, no matter how long and what it takes. The first class assignment is a nuclear weapons web. The idea is that you would write nuclear weapons, 2 words on the whiteboard, and circle it, and then ask the students to say anything they can think of when they hear these words. Then draw a line from the circle to connect each item to the central theme. Write down everything students report to affirm their knowledge. This will help the class to outline basic information about nuclear weapons and also address some false assumptions. and then discuss the web with your class. This is a very interesting exercise that I've used, and it's quite effective. The second class assignment is the famous BB demonstration. You may have witnessed this, or you may have done it yourself. Einstein have said this well: imagination is more important than knowledge. And this whole exercise is based on imagination. Because it's so difficult to imagine the destructive force of nuclear weapons, this demonstration is designed to help students to imagine the power of nuclear threat through sound. What you need is a metal can and a bag of BBs, metal BBs. So you should explain to your students and ask them perhaps to close their eyes, to focus their attention, that they will first hear two sounds. The first sound will represent the total firepower contained in all the weapons used in the Second World War, including the 2 nuclear bombs dropped in Japan, which is the equivalent of 3 million tons of TNT. That will be represented by one single BB dropping in the can. So you ask your students to close their eyes and drop the BB. It will make a ping sound. Ask them to think about it and ask them to name the firepower in the Second World War. It includes all the bullets, grenades, and bombs. Drop another BB, restating that all the munitions they just identified are represented by the sound of one BB. Now introduce the second sound. Tell students that the total firepower of the world's current nuclear arsenal is represented by the sound that they're about to hear. Emphasize that this sound does not include all the bullets, bombs, grenades, and other conventional weapons. Only the equivalent firepower of the nuclear weapons deployed today. Ask them to close their eyes and to remember that each BB represents the firepower of one World War II. Gradually pour the entire contents of the box of BBs into the can. After the last BB drops, take a moment of silence. Then discuss the emotions generated by the sounds and ask, what were the first thoughts that came to mind? Then show the following slide and ask the stated questions. The third class assignment is a simulation. You may have done this already in your classes. Divide your class into groups. Assign one group to role play, all or a combination of countries with nuclear weapons, and the other group of countries without nuclear weapons. Introduce briefly the recently concluded treaty on the ban of nuclear weapons as a topic of negotiation. Assign one student to be the moderator and let the fun, the negotiations begin. Discuss results afterwards and ask how students felt representing countries capable of destroying millions. Assignment 4. Ask students to write short essays on any of the following and present their views in class for discussion. I find these questions quite thought-provoking and they could lead to very interesting discussions among students. In particular, the second one, will nuclear weapons be eliminated in your lifetime? If you may recall, President Obama famously said so in his Prague speech, that while nuclear weapons may not be eliminated in his lifetime, he is trying to do everything possible to pave the way towards it. Also, important, given the little scenarios that I had earlier, what are the odds of nuclear weapons being used against in war? What kind of responsibility should the students have to prevent this from happening? What are the current obstacles in achieving a nuclear weapon-free world? What can ordinary citizens and students do to achieve that? And what should their leaders do? And what can they do to influence them? And this brings me to the final assignment, which is an action plan or taking action. This assignment is designed to inspire your students to take action. After all the lectures that you've so far heard in the Critical Issue Forum, your students may be a little bit depressed about the future. So ask your students to stand in a circle and stretch, and give them a few minutes to move around and let the tension out. Explain then that some of the information that they've learned in this exercise and in this lecture as well would make them feel uncomfortable. And as Mahatma Gandhi said, be the change you want to see in the world. We can see the changes that we want to make in our world. As human beings, we are capable of doing that, especially the younger generation. Now encourage students to share anything they know about young people that have played a role in making the world a better place. I list a few examples. These are few of many, many examples of young students, even as young as age 6, that have done things to inspire people. My own country, Nkosi Johnson, was a young Zulu boy who died of AIDS, but had the courage before to publicly confront the misperception of President Mbeki about AIDS and HIV. Of course, the famous Anne Frank, who wrote a diary while hiding in World War II, that helps us to understand, even today, the incredible capacity of human beings and the depth of the human heart. And then, just most recently, Cameron Caskey, an 11th grader at the Stoneman Douglas High School, and her friends who started the hashtag Never Again and March Our Lives movement against gun violence and in support of gun control in the United States. So let the circle grow and then bring everyone back together. Ask the students to close their eyes and imagine the world free of nuclear weapons, and ask them how they would, how this world would be built. How would the energy and tenacity of amazing young people like yourself and the ones I just heard about contribute to that world? Let students write their individual thoughts in their notebooks and ask them to comment on it, and encourage them to think of ways in which they can take action and how to inspire millions of students around the world to secure a safer world without nuclear weapons. I thank you very much, and I wish you good luck.
Okay, thank you so much, John. It was really insightful and thought-provoking, and also very inspiring lecture, especially your some suggestion and classroom activities are really useful. So for the purpose of like a stimulating like a discussion a little bit, I would like to ask just a few questions, just wanted to have some conversation with you for those who will be watching this video. So you gave a lot of important information. So I have some questions and some questions, but okay, let me start with this. In your lecture, you mentioned several times the role of nuclear weapons and during the Cold War, and why countries have nuclear weapons. And also you mentioned the nuclear posture review by Donald Trump. So it looks like the role of nuclear weapons has not been reduced compared to the Cold War. Do you have any thought on how to reduce the role of nuclear weapons in both national and international security?
Yes, Maski, you're absolutely right. The role of nuclear weapons, both in terms of policy of nuclear weapons, as well as the actual design of nuclear weapons, as a result of the design, have increased. In my view, it's even more dangerous than it was during the height of the Cold War. Nuclear weapons, some of the new designs that are being looked at in the United States and in other countries, would make a nuclear weapon smaller. It will make it more useful, if I can use a term, useful to describe a nuclear weapon, because the weapon can be used in battlefield conditions or to, for instance, penetrate a deep bunker to destroy an adversary, say North Korea's capability. Whereas nuclear weapons of the past were far bigger and would result in much larger fallout and consequences. So the technology driven by the politics would increase the propensity of use of nuclear weapons. What can we do to avoid that? Well, military leaders respond to political leaders. Political leaders respond to the voters. The problem, and this is why I try to end off with something where young people can take action. The problem today is that we accept that the military and the political leaders make decisions of national security on our behalf. And national security, as I've also tried to explain, does not rely on nuclear weapons. And so the sooner we can get masses of young students, their teachers, their parents to speak up. I mean, again, I was really struck by the comparison, and that's why I wanted to show this Time magazine cover about these young students that are taking on the NRA, and they are taking on congressmen and are willing to stand up. What if that enough could also be a message about nuclear weapons? So what is the next generation of students that are maybe listening to or in the classes of teachers that participate in the critical issues forum? That's how we're going to change things. It's not going to be easy, and it's not going to be done overnight. But we cannot just accept that political leaders will forever be responsible for our national security through nuclear weapons.
Thank you. That was encouraging. So that leads me to the next question. So you said you quoted Einstein's very famous word, imagination is more important than knowledge. This is very inspiring. So this really makes me feel those policy makers, world leaders, do they really understand actual impact, the real consequences, catastrophic consequences of the nuclear weapons? Because of course, some policy makers or world leaders, UN Secretary General, they visit Hiroshima, they have opportunity to listen to Hibakusha, and through the Critical Issues Forum project, I witnessed American students, Russian students, changed their perspective toward nuclear weapons after listening to the Hibakusha or after really visited Hiroshima and museums. Then, but I doubt that not so many American policy makers are really aware or really understand the actual impact of the use of nuclear weapons. What is your view on this aspect? Do they really understand the real impact of the use of nuclear weapons?
Very good question, Masako. Unfortunately, I don't think anyone has the real answer to it, but I can observe the following. It seems to me that as one gets older, you kind of lose some of your sensibility. I mean, your example, and I've seen it myself, of students that observe the legacy of the use of nuclear weapons in Japan and being exposed to the Abakucha and are all inspired. And they are the ones who aim through this critical issue forum to go out and make change. But it seems that as you get older, that this inspiration and logic thinking kind of disappears, because I find it hard to understand that highly intellectual beings that are rational thinkers can base their or direct their energy towards the complete destruction of nations. Make no mistake, the people that are in charge of the nuclear policies of the United States and any one of the other countries are very much focused on destruction, but they are not. They are highly intellectual people. They do this through very careful calculations. Even Kim Jong-un and his generals, people that argue that these people are mentally disturbed, are wrong. They are highly intellectual beings. The problem is they look at the power that nuclear weapons bring to them. If they look at it from a different perspective, say nuclear weapons will actually threaten them, as I was trying to, in one of my slides on the myths of nuclear weapons, the United States security is not protected through nuclear weapons. The only thing or force that can destroy the United States is a nuclear weapon. The United States is too large, its military force and its industrial power is too big for any other nation in the world to attack it, except with nuclear weapons.
Okay, thank you. So you said those leaders are, of course, they are highly intellectual, maybe with some, okay, I'm not gonna go there. So, okay, let me start with this, restart with this. So they understand the destructive power of nuclear weapons, and of course, but that really makes me feel, do they really understand human suffering? Human suffering is also very, this aspect really actually really led the movement of the humanitarian humanitarian approach toward the nuclear disarmament. So I still really believe the importance of looking at the human suffering, human aspect of the nuclear weapons. That I still believe that really changed the discourse, continue to change the discourse of nuclear discussion, whether or not you agree the ban treaty or not. This human aspect is a universal issue when we talk about nuclear weapons. That's actually my opinion. So that's also led me to the one question regarding the deterrence. Nuclear deterrence in your 10 nuclear myths section, nuclear weapons prevented the war between the US and the Soviet Union during the Cold War. And you refuted that idea. And I also tend to agree. But when you listen to the current US officials and many nuclear deterrence supporters believe the nuclear deterrence contribute to the stability. What would you say about this point? Does nuclear deterrence contribute to the stability?
The short answer to that is no, because nuclear deterrence, based on the MAD principle, assumed that both countries, or both, go back to the existence of the Soviet Union, had so many nuclear weapons that it would instantaneously destroy itself by using the weapons because the other country would do the same. And that is the baseline of why nuclear weapons are not used for those policy makers. The problem is you cannot sustain that number of nuclear weapons. So now you bring them weapons down, and you bring them down, and you bring them down, to a point where mutually assured destruction is no longer possible with lower numbers. Although, as I pointed out, you could use 200, one submarine can cause 60 million, have a kill ratio of about 60 million in a country such as Russia today. But that isn't necessarily going to mean that you're going to deter Russia from attacking you. So what is the purpose then of having the weapons if they will not deter? So let's put the US and Russia aside. If you look at other countries today that are armed with nuclear weapons, take India and Pakistan. India has a vastly superior conventional force than Pakistan. The two countries have been involved in several wars. What is the point of launching a nuclear weapon against Pakistan if, say, Pakistan or Pakistani-sponsored terrorists blow up a building or a city in India? This is a neighboring country. So using nuclear weapons against your neighbor makes absolutely no sense. The same applies in North Korea, South Korea. The same applies in the Middle East. So there is no use of a nuclear weapon, because if you use a nuclear weapon, the weapon will kind of, I may use to backfire on yourself. The regions are too small. So now come back to the US and Russia, where of course they are 10,000 miles apart, and they can fire missiles at each other. But that's not where the war will be fought. 2 world wars have been fought on the territories of Europe. And so European people, European leaders have to ask themselves, do they want to be destroyed again? And so the deterrence value of even a few nuclear weapons are then questioned. They sit there, and to me, they've become more of a power value. So it is about force projection. And the weapon itself, while utterly destructive, at the end means nothing other than they cost trillions and trillions of dollars to develop and maintain. And if you think about the conventional warfare technology, if I can coin it in such a way, that exists today, like it or not, and I don't, but nuclear weapons are actually old-fashioned devices. They are not modern methods of warfare. In fact, you talk to informally, and I'm sure I think some of them have actually gone on record, military commanders in the United States. They will all tell you that they don't want to have nuclear weapons deployed, because with the deployment of a nuclear weapon comes a whole variety of protocols that have been put in place. They can't use the weapon. They now have nuclear weapons that sit there on their Air Force base, but they can't use it because, of course, the command can only come from the highest authority, which is a good thing. But they sit with a weapon that they can't use. While they can apply that money to acquire more effective planes or more effective ships or whatever they need to do to fight a war, and they can't do so. This is even more important when it comes to smaller countries. And then there's one element that I did not highlight in my talk for the sake of time, but there's been so many cases where nuclear weapons were not used. Let's think about the Soviets in Afghanistan. After 10 years of war in Afghanistan, the Soviet Union, we may call the withdrawal of the Soviet Union tanks out of Afghanistan. They lost. They didn't use nuclear weapons. The US lost the war in Vietnam. They didn't use nuclear weapons. In all the conflicts where superpowers with nuclear weapons lost a war or were significantly hurt by a regional power, nuclear weapons were not used. They were considered to be used, but they were not used. So, pretty sure the point. So, what point does these weapons have in the end? And I would like to sort of end on this kind of note is it'll take one nuclear weapon state to take the bold step to say, let's get rid of these nuclear weapons. That could perhaps lead to others to start thinking about it. That state could be the United Kingdom. It could be North Korea. It will take one state to say enough. And what we need to try and do is create the environment for that to happen.
Great, thank you so much. So I think you gave a lot of ideas to continue to think about these very important topics. So thank you very much, John. I would like to conclude this session, but do you have any final comments to students?
Masaka, thank you very much. My comment and message to students is, be yourself, be who you believe in, and try not to conform to things that you've learned and be told to accept. The world today, as we see in this beautiful slide, is a magnificent place. The policies, the weapons, the dreadful things that have been done in the past need to remain in the past. What young leaders need today, look at today, is how to save this planet. And how to save this planet requires innovative thinking, it requires inspiration, and it requires a lot of energy. And so that's why I chose this particular slide. That's who we are. Somewhere on that planet, we have to survive. And it's in the hands of the young people. So good luck with that.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. With that note, I would like to conclude this session. So thank you so much. Bye-bye. Thank you. Bye. Stop recording.